Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Live More Life podcast, the good news about your health, which is a podcast where we dive deep into the world of healthcare, longevity, and health and wellness to bring you the most up-to-date insights and recent breakthroughs in improving your personal health. My name is Dr. Eric Reese, and I'm your host and healthcare co-pilot on this journey to a healthier, happier you. And the reason why we're putting this podcast on is that Nobody Studios is passionate about building startups from scratch. Nobody Studios is a high velocity venture studio focused on building 100 viable companies in the next 5 years. And I'm grateful to be one of the co-founders, and I'm also the director of health and wellness at Nobody Studios. And in this podcast, every week, we're going to be exploring exciting topics ranging from diet and exercise to nutrition and mindset, while also discussing recent medical breakthroughs and new technologies that are rapidly emerging on the market. We'll be combining the integration of both Western and holistic medicine practices into one exciting perspective, all designed to empower you, the viewer, with the knowledge and motivation to live your best life. And in today's episode, I am absolutely excited for this. My dear friend, Dr. Nichola Conlon will be joining us. Nichola Conlon is a renowned Ph.D. researcher. Nichola is a biochemist at heart, but she's also an amazing entrepreneur. She's a female founder. And I know that when you get going listening to Nichola speak, you will become motivated and exciting as well. Nichola is absolutely transforming the industry as we speak, and I'm so grateful to not only call her a friend, but to call her somebody who is a leader in this space. So thank you so much for joining us. I know that there is so much more behind the scenes I didn't mention about you and your background. So can you do the viewers a little bit more service and just tell them a little bit more about where you started and kind of what brought you to where you're at today with your journey?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Eric, for inviting me on this. I'm excited to chat with you as always. But yeah, my background is a scientist, so specializing in cell biology. Initially, I did my PhD looking at drug and nutrient absorption. So how when you take a drug, a supplement, even eat some food, does it go from being in your gut to then actually getting into your blood, and then more importantly, getting into the cells where they actually perform their function. And I realized very early on that academia probably wasn't the path for me. It was very frustrating that there was all this incredible science happening, yet it just wasn't actually getting to people. It's like it's just hidden and locked away in labs, and scientists kind of want to keep it to themselves and don't have the vision to kind of, quite often get it into a product or a drug or whatever. It just seems to take so long. So I decided to leave and go and work in industry. And initially I went and worked in pharmaceutical industry. I went and worked in drug development. And at the time, maybe a bit naively, I thought that was a way of getting the science out to the people. But then I realized very quickly that this is also very, very long-winded, and a lot of research doesn't actually make it into products.
Sure.
Also, a lot of the molecules that we were testing worked really, really well, and they were not drug molecules. They were molecules that were natural, things that didn't need to be regulated as drugs. So I left the world of drug development and I founded Nuchido back in 2017 with a mission of how can we take some of the latest science, particularly in the field of aging research, and translate it into products that we could actually get into the hands of consumers now, rather than waiting 10, 15 years. And more importantly, get these products out there with some good scientific evidence and testing. Because when people think of supplements and consumer products, they tend to think, these things aren't going to work. And we really wanted to shake that up and bring out products that actually were very scientifically credible, but were not drugs.
That's amazing. I'm so intrigued by your story and background because you really did come from, we'll say, a proper background in not only research, but then going into the pharmaceutical space. Like you had all of that experience, and it's, dare I say, you almost know too much at this point, right? So you've kind of gone down that path, and then you've came out on top where you have gone down a different path. So I'm interested to hear more about, what was it like working in pharma? Like when you were doing research and you were looking at novel molecules, there are a lot of people that are, in our network and also following this as well too, who are either in pharma or they're looking to get out of pharma and do some of the things that you're doing. Like, talk to me a bit about your experience in that space.
So for me personally, it was very frustrating because I was continually seeing, first of all, cutting edge science that could benefit people hugely. That was almost being dragged along very, very slowly.
Mm,
But secondly, that there was just so many molecules that worked incredibly well that drugs companies couldn't patent. So, for example, part of my job was we would look at all the different targets, all the different molecules. We'd send a list of all these molecules that we wanted tested in the labs in some screening tests, for example. We would find drugs that worked, well, not drugs, we'd find molecules that worked
sure.
amazingly. And we'd literally get a list back and we'd have this, like, say, like a spreadsheet, and it would be like 100 molecules ranked from best to worst. And quite often, the ones that worked really, really well at the top were natural compounds, things that
Mm,
people could find in foods, things that people were known to be well tolerated, safe. And part of my role was to go through and look if we could patent these molecules. And quite often it would be going through these top ones and going, well, yeah, these work amazing, but we can't patent them. So the companies would be like, well, not interested, bin, not interested, bin, and then we'd get to the ones that worked 50% as well. And it would be like, okay, this is a novel molecule. This is something that we can patent. Let's go and patent it. Let's go and invest 50 million into it. And for me, that was crazy because I was like, we are investing a huge amount of money into something that works half as well. And we don't know if it's going to be safe. We don't know if it's going to be tolerated. We don't know how it's going to really work in the body compared to these other molecules that are known to be safe, well tolerated, used in foodstuffs or natural medicine for hundreds of years. And we could do something with those things now, but we're going to pick something that's going to take 15 years to develop, an awful lot of money. We don't know if it's going to work. We don't know if it's going to be tolerable. Commercially, makes total sense. I
okay.
understand why drug companies do that, but ethically, for me, it just didn't fit. It was like, surely somebody should be doing something in the meantime with these other molecules. So that was sort of my position on it and why I decided to take the leap. And honestly, a lot of people thought I'd lost the plot. They thought I'd gone crazy. As you said, I've worked in academia and in drug development as a proper scientist. So when I said I was starting a supplement company, everyone was like, wow, you're throwing away your career. Like, you're
Mm.
going to have a company that sells snake oil. What on earth are you doing?
But I'm curious to learn more about your stance in the longevity space. So, talk to me a bit about some of the trends that you're seeing in the longevity space. I'm curious to hear your take and your opinion on where the longevity space is moving, for better or for worse. A lot of people who listen to this podcast are curious and interested in not only living longer, but also living, a more higher quality of life towards the later, years of their life. And so we really know chronic disease sets in later stage of life. What are you noticing in the longevity space right now that excites you? What are you noticing that is kind of like, well, we still have to figure this out, or it's maybe a bit overhyped? Do you have any opinions
Mm.
on that?
Well, for me, quite honestly, the exciting bit is now that a lot more people are actually talking about longevity. So for me, I got into the whole longevity space, wow, probably about like a decade ago now. And this is when, it was very much something that was, I'd say, more kept within a closed scientific community. And it was not something that was, in the public domain, and, more lay people were talking about it. But now, especially over the last couple of years, we've seen this huge shift where, even people that are my friends who I wouldn't ever have thought would have been interested in this space are now saying, oh, I've read this book and it's about longevity. And for me, that's exciting
Yeah.
because the reason I became so fascinated with the longevity space is for the potential that it has to absolutely rewrite how we perceive what aging is. And for a long time, it's always been believed that aging is this inevitable decline, that there is absolutely nothing we can do about it. And for that reason, when something's generally negative and there's no alternative, a lot of people will fall back on this sort of principle of, oh, well, let's just accept it. Let's just age gracefully. And, you know, those sorts of things that you hear about aging. But all of this research that's coming out is completely turning that all on its head. It's so strong, the research now, that people consider it as a bit woo-woo or a bit out there. You know, this is happening. We know that aging is our biggest risk factor for pretty much every chronic disease that drugs companies are trying to target. So if we can slow aging even just a little bit at the cellular level, we can have a massive impact on multiple chronic age-related diseases. And that in turn is going to not only, you know, in terms of the economic benefit, but the societal benefit, the way it's going to impact families, the way it's going to impact the workspace. This is something that I always say, what is coming is going to completely change the way that we think about aging. And in terms of like what is happening in this space, and you know, a lot of people say to me, well, why has this suddenly become a big thing? You know, we've gone from believing that it's inevitable to suddenly being like, oh, it's not, by the way. You know, what has actually changed scientifically? And what has changed is that we now have a much deeper understanding of what is actually going on at the cellular level to drive the entire aging process. And the bit that really excites me is the real focus on what we call the hallmarks of aging. So these are the 12 key cellular failures, shall we say, that seem to drive the entire aging process. Because although we often think about aging as what we see on the surface or how we feel or in terms of disease, actually everything starts much earlier than that at the cellular level. Everything has a cellular root cause. So the bits that excite me are at the fact that we now understand what's happening and the things that are being developed to try and target these hallmarks of aging to actually slow the process of aging as we perceive it and as we feel it and as we see it on the outside.
I have so many questions for you that I know I will not be able to fit into this. So a couple of things. One, I know that there are people viewing and watching this. If there are people listening who do have questions, please throw them in the chat. I would love to be able to have Nichola answer some questions because selfishly, I'm going to just ask my questions until others do. So the other thing I wanted to say as well is, Nichola, you are an absolute wealth of knowledge. And these discussions are not only exciting to me, but they're so informative. And I think so many people still don't even know what they don't know. And so the reason we're starting a newsletter at Nobody Studios, specifically in the health and wellness space, is because of this. We want to give people consistent, regular updates, information, and translate the science to the layman terms, everyday information people can understand. So for those who are listening to this or watching the recording, feel free to go ahead and register at nobodystudios.com/newsletter to get attached and get subscribed to our newsletter, because we're going to bring on amazing guests like Nichola Conlon and many others who are going to be able to challenge and change the way we think about longevity. So, Nichola, my first question for you is, you see this all over the place. People are talking about NAD+, and it is the panacea, for the lack of a better term, of longevity and optimizing health. Talk to me a bit about what NAD+ is, why so many people are consumed by it. And I know you have a bit of a contrarian thinking along this lines of NAD+. So I'd love for you to ruffle some feathers, if possible, about the NAD+ space as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, NAD is become a word that I'd say is now becoming a buzzword within the longevity space. Again, when I first got into the space, if I mentioned NAD, everyone looked at me very blankly and was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But now, even those people that are starting to hear about longevity generally have also heard about NAD. And the reason that it's become such a buzzword in the longevity space is because of its impact that it seems to have on cellular aging. So basically, it's a natural molecule that's actually found in all of our cells, and it's involved in a lot of different cellular reactions and processes in the cell. But the two things that it's most famous for are for energy production. So it helps to convert the food that we eat into the energy that our cells need to function, and this happens in our mitochondria. And the other thing that it's famous for is repair. So NAD seems to act as a fuel to drive many repair processes that are continuously going on inside of our cells in our bodies to repair any damage before we even notice that it's a problem. So NAD fuels these processes. Now, the issue that we have is that as we get older, our NAD levels start to decline. And if NAD goes down, that means we've got less NAD for efficient energy production. So we start to suffer from things like tiredness, fatigue, brain fog. But also, if NAD goes down, we have less NAD to power repair. So we start to see an accumulation of damage in our cells because our cells don't have that fuel to power all these repair processes that need to be continually working. So when NAD declines as we get older, it means that our cells become less resilient. They start to build up more damage. And we start to see that as a manifestation of the signs and symptoms of aging. And there was, a lot of interest from scientists for, quite a while ago now saying, well, if we've got this molecule, it's very important for all of these things. It declines with age. Then why don't we just not let it decline with age? And why don't we try and keep levels high or top our levels back up? So there was a big push to look at ways to try and restore NAD in our bodies. And it was found that if you restored your NAD levels to useful levels, then not only did energy production become more efficient again, but also repair was switched back on. You started seeing DNA repair happen. You started seeing autophagy, recycling in the cells. Basically, all of these things that are happening very well in our cells when we're young to keep us young and healthy all started getting switched back on again, essentially. So this led to a lot of excitement and looking at ways to boost NAD. And initially it was thought, well, why don't we just take pure NAD? Why don't we put it in capsules, put it in creams, like any way that we can get it in our bodies? But it was very quickly realized that NAD itself is a very unstable molecule, meaning that you can't just simply, put it in your mouth and swallow it. So the next best thing was what we call precursors. And these are what I would refer to as first generation NAD boosters. Precursors are the raw material that our body uses to make NAD, and they are much more stable, and also they are much smaller. And this means that if you say arguably you did take pure NAD, even if it got into the body in its whole form, it wouldn't be absorbed because it's too big. So these precursors are actually much smaller, they're more stable, and they can pass into the cells. And then what happens in the cells is that the cells then turn these raw materials into NAD. And for anyone that's ever looked into NAD, you will have definitely come across a precursor called NMN. And this is probably the most famous one. So the idea behind this is that if you give the body more of the raw material to make NAD, then hopefully it will turn it into NAD. And this was the sort of, the thought process for a long time. And there was a lot of studies on these NMN and different precursors. But it was realized that they didn't seem to boost NAD as well as we would have expected. And when people started to look into the reasons why NAD actually declines, it all started to make sense. And this is because NAD actually declines in our body because the enzymes that literally take this raw material and turn it into NAD, they actually decline with age. So you can give the body as much precursor or as much NMN as you want, but if it doesn't have the enzymes to actually convert it, then you are not going to get very much NAD out the other end. And I always say, you can think of this as an analogy. If your cells were like an NAD producing factory, and you went in the factory and were like, why is my NAD production gone down? And you saw it was because the machines were broken, the pipes were leaking, there was no staff. There is no way you would say, oh, let's ignore all those problems and let's just order more raw material and hope we get more NAD out the other side. You'll be like, no, we need to fix the problem. So now, there's a lot of agreement within the NAD space that the best way to boost NAD is actually to fix the root cause of its decline.
Interesting. And so I'm so curious to hear more about how you kind of discovered these pathways or this problem, because so many people for so long, and you see it in a lot of major camps in the longevity space where they're talking about, even to this day, I still see it all the time. NMN,
Mhm.
NR, right? So, methylated B vitamins. And so as they're all, correlated and in that space, it's intriguing to have you, kind of come to us a bit of a contrarian thought process. But I understand behind Nuchido, there's a lot of data and a lot of research. And so with your background, your experience, and your thought process, there's a lot to be said about that. So why do you think people are still stuck in that old school type of thinking? And then second question for you is, tell us a bit more about Nuchido and why it's different from other NAD plus supplements out there in the longevity space.
Yeah, I think the reason that people are still stuck in that way of thinking is because of a very common problem that we have throughout a lot of cell biology and just a lot of biology and science in general, which is what we'd call molecular reductionism, which is this idea that we're trained as academic scientists usually to look at single pathways or look
Yeah.
at single genes or single molecules. And even if you think of the drug development world, we look and see, okay, there's a disease. And then we say, well, this gene or this pathway or this enzyme is implicated in this disease. So let's design a specific drug that is going to stick to it and alter it. But the reality is that when something is going wrong in the body, or indeed any biology, there are huge networks of all sorts of different processes and pathways going on. And if you really want to affect biology in a way that's going to have an impact, often you need to do more than one thing. You need to be looking at all the different factors that are at play. And I was very fortunate that the drug development company that I went and worked for actually specialized in this way of thinking, something called network pharmacology, which is where you don't just look at one target, you look at as an issue and you look at all of the different aspects of biology that are actually causing that issue. And then you design drugs or supplements or whatever as a combination of different things that are going to target all of the different areas of that biology. So when you look at NAD, it's like the perfect example of an issue that is never going to have a single solution. So obviously I've just spoken about the fact that the main reason why NAD declines is because a key enzyme that basically makes and recycles it in our bodies declines with age. Well, actually, it's even more complicated than that. There's a lot more things going on. We know that not only does that enzyme not work as well, but also we know that chronic low-grade inflammation that we have and we suffer from as we get older, that also drives down a lot of our NAD, because NAD fuels, remember, it acts as a fuel, it fuels a lot of inflammatory processes. So as inflammation goes up, our levels of NAD go down. So immediately you've got two different problems going on there. The other issue that you start to see is that if the NAD precursors are not getting recycled, you start to see methylation start to change in the cells, and cells that become low in the recycling enzyme for NAD, you start to see them switch on other enzymes that actually promote methylation. So there's a third thing that is actually going wrong. So with Nuchido, what we wanted to do was actually say, instead of ignoring all of these issues in the factory, we want to actually address each of the different issues that is going on and provide a product that not only gives a precursor, so it doesn't just have a raw material in there, but it actually has different molecules that are designed to switch back on that key enzyme that produces NAD to actually inhibit that methylation enzyme that we don't want switched on,
I love
to
that.
inhibit the chronic inflammation that we know is driving down NAD. So we're going and looking at the problem as a whole and designing a product that has ingredients in that actually fixes all of these different parts. So when we designed this product, obviously it's a, as you said, it's a very different way of thinking. And when it comes to the NAD space, everyone is so focused on the argument of whether NMN is better than NR or NR is better than NMN. And then here we are saying, that's irrelevant. They're both rubbish. Actually, what you need to do is, fix the root cause of the issue. So, coming out with something like that is quite radically different. So, as a scientist, I said, well, the evidence is already there. I've published papers to show that this is not a theory. The evidence is all out there in the literature. We also then did a full double-blind placebo-controlled crossover study on our formulation to show that not only does it boost NAD, but it also actually switches back on that natural production of NAD by restoring levels of that key enzyme. So it's the first supplement that's been proven to be able to switch back on your natural NAD production.
Powerful.
So yeah, and as with anything, it's much better to address a root cause than ignore it, because often when you do ignore it, you start to get other issues. And this is exactly what we're now seeing in the NMN space. There's multiple, and also NR, there's multiple human studies now showing that these can cause methylation problems, that they can cause inflammatory problems. And again, for me, it's not surprising because you're ignoring a lot of what's going on in the cell and, just pumping in more raw material and hoping for the best.
Yeah, there's always trade-offs from a physiological, biochemical. I mean, there's always going to be a trade-off, right? You pull one lever and the other levers are going to go and they're going to influence things. And it's the same with, neuroscience and, from wanting to stimulate or inhibit one area of the brain. And then you have this whole cascade of other things that occur. And so that systems type thinking is massive. And not only for building a startup, getting involved in medical research, or even looking at a supplement, but like the body is just so much more complex than we give it credit for. So I respect that opinion so much. And thank you for that. That was a great way to kind of really get deep into what you're doing. And I know there's so much more underneath the hood as well that you could really get nerdy into. But for those who are listening to you speak, and obviously, there's an opportunity for them to go pick up your product. Like, what are other ways that people can help maximize their longevity and quality of life today? What would you suggest for them to go after and for them to start doing?
So for me, I think people are always surprised because obviously I own a supplement company. So, I'm biased and they expect me to always say, go and buy supplements. But I always say, before investing in anything, get the basics right. We
Yes.
know that lifestyle plays such a huge role in influencing how well we will age. It's absolutely imperative that you get the lifestyle right. So if you are not exercising, you are eating a beige inflammatory diet, there is absolutely no point thinking that you're going to take a supplement to boost your NAD and that's going to be the answer to everything. We know that a lot of the way that we will age is influenced, well, it's around 80%, depending on the study that you look at, is influenced by lifestyle, not our genes. So I think that's really important. Another thing that I always like to highlight, especially for any women listening, is the importance of hormones. So a lot more studies are now highlighting that when you are going through perimenopause and menopause, the shift in the hormones in your body actually can massively speed up your rate of aging. And a lot of women will report, I feel like I've aged 10 years since I've hit this period of my life. And now there's actually scientific evidence backing up that actually menopause can cause a massive increase in biological age over a very short period of time. So don't underestimate the importance of things like keeping track of your hormones, getting those tested, maybe hormone replacement. That's something as well that I think is not spoken about enough, but can have a huge impact. And I've seen it have a big impact on many people.
Yeah, that's powerful. There are some great diagnostic tests to run out there too, specifically with hormones. Like in our clinic, we run a Dutch panel, which essentially looks at so many different metabolites and
Yeah.
intermediaries of hormones, and it gives you a really comprehensive overview and approach to what's working and what isn't. I know that there are companies out there right now who are doing different assessments for females to look at that. And you're so right. Diet, lifestyle, nutrition, sleep, exercise, or the lack thereof in all of those categories can have significant outcomes. And it's interesting that we're in 2024 and we're still talking about the basics and how impactful and important they are for people. And so I agree with you. You can't out supplement your way out of a really poor diet
Mhm.
and lifestyle. But maybe that's the first step for somebody. Maybe
Yeah.
they start taking the product and maybe they do start feeling a little bit better. And they're like, gosh, maybe now I am more apt to look at my diet or optimize my sleep more. And so, and
If
yeah,
someone's suffering from a lack of energy and then they have no motivation to go to the gym or do the exercise, then you're right. Something like NAD, we know with our product, one of the top reported benefits is people feeling like they've got more energy. And they always say it's not like like a caffeine buzz type energy. It's more like they just feel like just more alive and have more life about them, and more like, I want to get up, I want to go and do things, I want to get on with things. And that motivation can sometimes be the triggering factor for people to say, well, you know what, today I am going to go for a walk, or I am going to go for a gym. And then people feel better, and then it's a progressive cycle of being able to build on that.
it's powerful. What an amazing side effect, huh? God, it's
Yeah.
almost like there's something going on and it's maybe working. So, Nichola, you are you're such a wealth of knowledge, and I love your take on this space. I have so much respect for you as an entrepreneur, as a founder, as a female founder
Mhm.
who's building an amazing company. And so, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you and they want to approach you?
So I do most of my activity on Instagram. So it's just at Dr. Nichola Conlon, just my name. And if they want to learn more about Nuchido, at Nuchido or Nuchido.com, and Nuchido spelled Nuchido.
Lovely. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Nichola, we are almost done with today's podcast recording. I want to ask you one last question. Is there anything that you want to leave our listeners or guests with regards to those who are looking to get into longevity space, those who are wanting to change their life,
Mhm.
improve their quality of life? Anything that you would suggest for them, or anything you want to leave them with?
For me, I think, knowledge is power. Try and soak up as much knowledge as possible, because this space is changing. This is a new space. The science, the research is continually changing. And it's something where, we don't know exactly what the correct formula for longevity is yet. It's still something that we're researching. And if the more that you can keep on top of the research, the more that you can follow this space, then the more knowledge you're going to have to, maybe try different things or look at things that may fit your personal biology or your lifestyle. And I think having that knowledge and, just keeping learning, it's just so empowering to know that you have options. Because as I said earlier, all of the research coming out is truly going to change the way that we age. So be empowered and have all that knowledge ready to embrace it.
It's an exciting time to be alive. We'll put it
It
that
is.
way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Nichola, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all for today's episode with Dr. Nichola Conlon. I hope you found it as enlightening as I did. She's always inspiring. So, Dr. Conlon, thank you again for joining us and sharing your expertise. To our listeners, remember to tune in for the next episode of the Live More Life podcast, the good news about your health. Don't forget to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the major podcast platforms. And if you're interested in learning more and tagging along on this journey, be sure to sign up for our health and wellness newsletter. So nobodystudios.com/newsletter. And that's going to be it for us today. And we're absolutely excited to continue this journey. So thank you again for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again on the next one.